But, maybe you have a wide gap in terms of service delivery or functions. What is that premium that you're paying between the two, or the perception of the value that you're receiving? And, what does that value gap versus expense need to really be? So where is it? This is a huge one. And when they're selecting data centers, I'll talk about this more with some examples and who's there. Hi, I'm Max Clark. This is 20 minutes max. I'm going to try to do this in 20 minutes today. I'm also going to try something a little new, something I haven't done before. And I'm going to talk about how I pick data centers. So a little bit about me first, why you should listen to me. I have been co-locating and building out data centers for over 25 years now. This is everything from on-premise, your little server rack in a room, to render farms, to custom data center deployments in hospitals. When I say custom data center deployments, I mean helping people get generators and UPSs and the full Met plant put in, race floor, everything. The ghetto colos, these are just the random one-off locations with no real business actually hosting equipment. I've seen plenty of those in the day. And all the way up to your, premier top tier facilities. I've personally, in previous business, we scaled to multiple megawatts of data center floor space. I found out that I was the fourth largest data center operator in Wilshire when the building was sold. It's a fun story. Number 3 was Google. And today we help clients with data center selection and deployments basically in every major continent. When I say major, every continent. So we do North America, South America, a lot of Asia. So Singapore is now very popular. Used to be Hong Kong, but a little geopolitics there going on. Japan, of course, Europe, Africa, South Africa has been a thing. I'm expecting that to grow. India, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about, how and why you pick a data center, and, what's the actual, what people actually seem to care about a lot. So, and of course, some contrarian advice here. Really, this boils down to 3 things. You're probably already guessing what this is, but those 3 things are: how much does it cost? Where is it? And who's there? Okay, so I don't like leading into these things with price ever, but let's be real. Everything always at some point when you're in a selection process comes down to price. And so we try to help counsel people, and also make evaluations and determinations into what I call acceptable premiums. So in some cases, you'll see things where you might have 2 providers, 2 suppliers, and I don't want to say they're equal enough, but they're similar enough. And but one is much better. Well, that doesn't mean similar enough anymore. I'm going to contradict myself already. But, maybe you have a wide gap in terms of service delivery or functions. What is that premium that you're paying between the two, or the perception of the value that you're receiving? And what does that value gap versus expense need to really be? So where is it? This is a huge one for a lot of clients. And when they're selecting data centers, I'll talk about this more with some examples and who's there. And so let's get into it. Okay, so the first one, where? So this is a data center map exported from our system here of the Los Angeles Metro. This ring is 200 miles. 2 things I want to point out here with the LA market specifically is you can see here in the northeast, we've got Las Vegas, and then over to the east, we've got Phoenix. And so Las Vegas and Phoenix have become very popular markets for DR facilities or alternate facilities out of the LA Metro. And this could be good for you, and it could be bad for you. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment. But anyway, so we can see here in this map, based on the filter selection, we've got this cluster here in Los Angeles, we've got this cluster in Orange County, we've got this cluster in San Diego. And so as we zoom into this thing, you can get a little more fidelity at what that actually means in terms of facility count and approximately where they are. But I'm going to zoom all the way in here to my favorite representation of this. We look at this Los Angeles Metro specifically, and what really become, the major data center players here in this market, right? So downtown Los Angeles is really where it's at. And you can see this cluster that's 13 of really what you consider downtown LA. And this 3 is thanks to CoreSite when they purchased 900 North Alameda and then turned that into a real data center operation downtown. And then we've got down here around El Segundo, and El Segundo Exodus actually started El Segundo off back in the late 90s, 200 North Nash. And this is where dominantly you see Equinix facilities down in El Segundo. Now, why Los Angeles versus El Segundo? And by the way, there's other facilities in here. We've got facilities in Hawthorne. There are more data centers on this map, right? Wilshire Boulevard, a little bit north of this 10 freeway. There's some private on-prem build-outs in different buildings that have come up that some people like to use for different reasons. We talk about this in terms of geography first. If you're a Los Angeles-based business and you're looking for a data center, and you're looking for something close because you're building it out yourself, where this facility actually is going to be a pretty big, really important to you. When I, going back 25 years, I was living in Santa Monica, and the only real data center operations were in Irvine. If you were a tech company in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you needed a data center, and chances are that data center, the closest one to you was pretty far. It was down here in this Irvine. We see this little 6 down here with 405 and 73 kind of fork. That's where all the data center action was. And, Santa Monica to Irvine can be anywhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours on the car, depending on traffic. Fortunately, back then there wasn't as much traffic for when I had to go visit these things. It is a pretty big consideration, just Los Angeles specific. If you're a Pasadena-based company, if you're out in the valley somewhere, San Fernando Valley, if you're in Calabasas, Thousand Oaks, probably don't want to talk about facilities in Irvine so much. A big concern that comes in and people really, focus on is drive time at staff. First data center, it's usually going to be your staff from your office driving to that facility. As you get into bigger and bigger data centers, the economics of the location of the data center versus the distance to your office really come into play, and you're usually staffing out people and technicians to be physically present at that data center. So rules of thumb, probably under a half a megawatt, 500 kilowatt of power, really under 250 kilowatt of power. The physical proximity to your office and your primary operations is going to be more important to you than differentials in, cost of floor space or cost of electricity. Once you cross over, 500 kilowatt, you get into, megawatt plus deployments, the price differential of a facility selection is going to make more difference to you than, the inconvenience of having to hire, people for there. So in the LA to Vegas, location, like you're not driving staff from LA to Vegas. You could do it if you're doing a big build out, but they're going to fly. You're going to put people on an airplane to fly from LA to Vegas. Really, if you're putting a big deployment, a big build out in Vegas, you're hiring in Vegas. That's a simple just way of thinking about that and looking at that. Anyways, okay, so I'm just going to point some things out here, just on this map here. You can see this little blue dot here at Burbank. We've got El Segundo, we've got Irvine, and we've got downtown Los Angeles. So just kind of make note of that, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. Another thing about where, and this is pretty important, and people don't think about until sometimes it's too late, is the impact of taxes and taxation on your facilities. For instance, why do you see a lot of facilities down here in El Segundo versus Los Angeles? Well, how El Segundo taxes businesses is very different from how LA City taxes businesses. This is, of course, huge in different markets. New York, New Jersey, Chicago. Our friends in Chicago were one of the first municipalities to really create this idea of unpossessed property taxation. But where you physically put equipment that runs your business, especially if you're financing or leasing that equipment in any way and you have a UCC filed against you, that's going to pop up and the taxing authority is going to see you there. And that may be good or that may be bad. Now, in the case of LA, it might be advantageous for you to have a colocation facility in El Segundo and use that as your point of transaction, alter how your business taxes are paid and calculated with your LA office operations. So, you can apportion your revenue, and we did this, and this is something I learned a long time ago. But, and for instance, that business was based in Marina del Rey, in Los Angeles City, in Marina del Rey, but the data center was in El Segundo. So we took an operation that was generating, multiple millions of dollars a year in revenue, and instead of paying, Los Angeles City a lot of municipal tax, completely different calculation for El Segundo. It saved the company millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. So understand kind of taxing rules of where you're getting yourself into and whether or not that's going to either open you up to a nexus, it's going to get really expensive for you from a tax standpoint, or if you're going to be able to leverage that asset to reduce your tax burden. Not a lot of people talk about for some reason, but also, of course, like sales tax. When you purchase equipment, you pay sales tax on it. You paying 11% in sales tax, or are you going to pay 6% in sales tax? That factors into these sorts of things. Next thing, let's talk about fiber. And talk about, this is the arteries and the veins that connect the world together and the internet together, and why this actually is important. So this is Zayo's public network map. You go to their website and download this, and there's nothing too weird here. The point that I want to make here and give is now these cities have way more density of interconnection. This used to not be the case. Go back 20 years, we've got a lot more fiber built here. But this is talking about, building out and what you actually need in terms of redundancy for facilities. Everything kind of becomes these like little loops, these circles. So LA, Vegas, Salt Lake City, Boise, Think of that as kind of like a little loop. And a lot of fiber runs that way. We've got this Salt Lake, Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, Denver, right? Like these little kind of like intersecting circles. From a network diversity conversation, and this drives a lot of this desire to get into, we need to co-locate and we need to move really far out with a data center because we need to have network redundancy. Well, if you think about it from Los Angeles, just going from Los Angeles to Irvine opens up this second, path for you out to Phoenix. And maybe that's far enough distance. Oh, by the way, the network is routing you to Phoenix anyways from Los Angeles. You're going through Irvine anyway. So like LA, Irvine, Phoenix, or LA, Phoenix, LA, Irvine, San Diego, Phoenix. Sometimes you can be still pretty close and have effective DR based on the kind of scenario that you're trying to protect against with your DR. So fiber breaks, fiber outages, and the next thing we'll talk about usually drive that conversation. Of course, LA, it's always about the mythical 10.0 earthquake, which I hope to never experience in my lifetime because the scenarios for that are really, really terrible. Point here is Los Angeles to Vegas, Los Angeles to Irvine, Los Angeles to San Diego, Los Angeles to Phoenix. The reason why Vegas and Phoenix become so popular is, you get this access now to network traffic that was routing a different direction. Fun little quirk. About 2 decades ago, a bridge went out in a rainstorm in Northern California, connecting Los Angeles to San Francisco. And, there was a period of time for a few hours where traffic between LA and San Francisco was actually routing across the Pacific. So we were seeing things go to Asia and then come back to Northern California because that fiber route wasn't there. And the way the MPLS networks were calculating cost, it wasn't routing inland to Salt Lake City. You see that kind of stuff, not so much anymore, but you still see that. Anyway, so okay, this is Zaos. I'm going to show you Lumen zoomed in a little bit, the way their map actually generates. We lose some real estate, but same kind of thing. This is actually showing fiber assets within Lumen's network. Los Angeles to Vegas, Los Angeles to Irvine, of course San Diego. These routes that go to Phoenix from both directions. Yep, there's a lot of fiber that runs through Palm Springs. It goes out to Phoenix. Fiber that follows. What are these lines? And why do they follow? They follow freeways and railroads. I mean, there's not really a lot of sophistication in why this route was chosen. It's a freeway or it's a railroad because you need a right of way. Going back up here and talking about where are you going to put your second facility? Again, you can kind of see this Barstow route coming up here to Las Vegas. Looks familiar from Lumen's map, I'm sure. But if you're in Los Angeles and you have a primary facility, you start talking about, well, where do you want to put a second facility? You got lots of choices. Okay, last thing I want to talk about. Not the last thing I want to talk about. This is the second last thing I want to talk about. Electricity. Electricity impacts you in two ways. It's the primary driving factor in data center cost. So how much is electricity? How much is a land? What does it cost to build? Major factor in data centers. A lot of data centers that are on the market today were built a long time ago, so they're not really factoring in what was the land acquisition cost anymore in terms of the cost of the facility. It's taxation is drives a lot of the cost and the expense of the data center. There's a reason why you don't see new data center construction happening in Los Angeles. There's a reason why Hillsborough is more popular than Portland, for instance. There's a reason why Ashburn, Virginia happened. It's a in those cases it's a land play. How much does the land cost, and how much is the electricity cost in order to power the facility? So there's 2 points with electricity. The first one is how much what's your effective rate per kilowatt hour, and that's influenced based on what the generation is. So is it hydro? Is it coal? Is it nuclear? That impacts what's the cost per kilowatt hour. Impacts. Data center has to run air conditioning, right? So that factors into how much you pay for that data center space. Whether you're on a breakered kW or a critical kW in the metered power in a data center, what the rate per kilowatt hour of that data center is really important to you in terms of the cost. Now, small pops, if you're building out, again, sub 250 kilowatt, the cost differential between, 9 cents and 13 cents a kilowatt hour is going to, it's going to show up on that spreadsheet, but it's not going to be so outsized that other things aren't going to influence the decision more. This is from California's PUC website, and you're going to see this in other markets as well, and it's important to understand and look at. But Los Angeles is very fun to look at this thing because we talk about power as a factor in driving DR decisions. What happens if there's a grid failure? We need to be in Vegas so that way we've got alternate network and we've got alternate, power, or we need to be in Phoenix because we have to have alternate network and alternate power. Looking at this map, and I pointed out a couple of those dots, we see LADWP. So all of Los Angeles is this LADWP, this orange kind of shaded in area. You notice there's like some cutouts here. Those cutouts are important to look at, right? So first cutout, all the downtown Los Angeles facilities, of course, LADWP. Look at this little island here. That's Burbank. It's Burbank Water and Power. So that facility in Burbank, it's got a different power generator. It's got its own power system. It's not LADWP. All those El Segundo facilities, guess what? They're not LADWP. In Southern California, Edison, blue, like light shaded blue, is all SCE. Same thing in Orange County. You see City of Anaheim. So there's facilities in Anaheim, Santa Ana, different power. Orange County, Irvine, again, SoCal Edison, and then you come down to San Diego and San Diego Gas and Electric. If your dominant desire is to have redundant power and redundant providers and utilities for power, and you're in Los Angeles, you can go to El Segundo or Irvine and have a reasonable expectation for redundancy. DWP, LADWP, and SCE are interconnected with each other, and you can talk about what sort of like cascading event could really happen. But in terms of like, I want to make sure that if LADWP, blows up some substations or whatever because a car runs into it, which is that we have a redundant facility. And so in those cases, you can have two facilities pretty close to each other. I mean, the distance between downtown Los Angeles and El Segundo is not terribly far. Mileage isn't terribly far, but if you've driven it, time of day factors into your time of transport. Reasonable redundancy and between these two power companies, and you can have it in the same city. You don't have to go to Vegas in order to get that kind of redundancy. I'm going to talk about networks for a little bit. Again, this is a big factor of what you're doing with your data center. Are you looking for really dense interconnection with different network providers? That's going to make a big factor also in terms of the more networks that are in a facility, the cheaper, the more competition there is for acquiring customers at those facilities. You have different economic dynamics that happen in those buildings. And this is the LA1 facility, aka the One Wilshire building. This is PeeringDB. PeeringDB is a public database that networks can add themselves to in order to look and find interconnection points and talk about their stuff. But so here, CoreSite, 305 networks. It's actually much more than that. When you look at the entire CoreSite ecosystem in Los Angeles, it's over 400 networks, and the buildings are interconnected with each other. FYI. But so 305 networks here in this building. Let's go across the street, 600 West 7th Street, Digital Realty, 38 networks. That may or may not be a big issue for you. And this is something that we look at and we evaluate and we talk about with our clients before we get too deep into these facilities. Now, could you get a better deal at one building versus another? I mean, of course, right? And this is where we start talking about, the differences between buildings. Are you driving a cost value play first, but does that get countered with, if there was a network that you needed and you were at Digital Realty at 600 West 7th, and that building was across the street at One Wilshire, that network, the cost of taking a metro connection, so the cross connect to the facilities on both sides, the metro connection, whatever is actually going on in the street to connect those two facilities, if you do that a lot, very quickly can eradicate any sort of cost advantage that you would have had over at 600 versus, just co-locating in the other building in the first place. So let's just keep going to the LA. So here's Equinix. This is the LA3, LA4 sites. There's actually a cluster of Equinix facilities down in El Segundo. Similar story, 38 networks registered at this complex. Might be an issue for you, might not be an issue, just something to be aware of. Now, I kind of picked on DRT and Equinix a little bit in Los Angeles, but let me show you some comparisons with this. So this is Digital Realty at the 56 Marietta in terms of like your super connector buildings and markets. One Wilshire building in SoCal, 56 Marietta is the equivalent of that in Atlanta for the southeastern region of the United States. So if you need colo in Atlanta, the prime facility here is Digital Realty. So I pull that one out just to make that point. And of course, here's Equinix's campus in Ashburn. You can see 430 networks. So, there is, understanding which markets, why what market, what are you trying to achieve with that market are all very important. Where are you located? What are you trying to achieve with it? Who do you need to interconnect with it? DR is a fun conversation for me to get into. The other part of DR, and I'll make another video about this one and get into this in much more detail, but if you're going to go through the expense of putting a DR facility in another market, I would argue putting that other DR facility only 300 or 400 miles away from you is probably not the best idea, because you're not going to be able to lever that facility as much as you could if it was in a completely different region. West Coast to Central, West to East Coast, these sorts of things give you other opportunities to do things that you wouldn't be able to do if they were on top of each other. And if you're okay with them being on top of each other with LA and Vegas, then maybe just downtown in El Segundo gives you enough, or downtown Irvine, or maybe even downtown San Diego is kind of unusual, but LA to Irvine for sure, is a very reasonable strategy. I'm Max Clark. That was more than 20 minutes, but hopefully this helped you.